And good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and happy December 1st, 2021. I hope you took advantage of our fantastic November 2021 three-book special. You know, it's over. I'll be introducing a really good, fantastic December 2021 special. I haven't announced it yet because I wanted to get your input. Okay, let me know what books you would like for me to offer for the December 2021 special. What combo of books would you like for me to offer? Now, don't tell me that you want me to offer it at a 90% discount, okay? Sorry, can't do that. But let me know which combo or which single book that you would like for me to offer at a discount for the month of December 2021. And since I'll give this a couple of days, I will extend the special for a few days into January 2022, okay? I just wanted to get that out there for you. I have intended to announce that before now, so I apologize for not doing that. Okay, we are continuing our examination of the coming of the Son of Man, which is the return of the absent master of Acts 1, which is the return of the absent master of Matthew chapter 25. Now, I would like for you to take note of the fact that in Matthew chapter 25, in introducing the parables, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like. Well, why was he saying that? Well, he was saying that the kingdom of heaven is like the bridegroom who delayed his coming and then came to receive his bride, to take her or to be with her, to dwell with her. The kingdom of heaven is like a certain man who went into a far country there to receive a kingdom and to return. That's actually Luke 19, but it's the parallel of Matthew 25:14. So Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like. Well, since Daniel chapter 7 is all about the time of the full establishment of the kingdom that had been initiated when Christ sat down at the right hand of the majesty in the heavens, Psalms 110, set at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. That's how the New Testament writers applied the Ascension. Okay? That's how they applied it. That's how Peter applied it in Acts chapter 2. But we've got to go on here. What I'm sharing with you now is, okay, if Matthew chapter 25 and the return of the absent master, if that's Acts chapter 1, then if Acts chapter 1 is the fulfillment of Daniel, as most commentaries say, then we've got to deal with the fact of how the New Testament writers apply Daniel chapter 7. And thus, if Daniel chapter 7 is a judgment coming, then you've got to say one of two things. Acts chapter 1 is not Daniel 7, which destroys the entire futurist paradigm, basically, or that the judgment of the little horn took place in Acts chapter 1, which, of course, is patently false. Just doesn't work. So, I'm sharing with you now, this is lesson number 3, an examination of how the New Testament uses the terminology in its direct references to Daniel 7, 13 and 14, and the promise of the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven to receive the kingdom. Okay? Now, my good friend Larry Siegel says we need to make a careful delineation between Christ entering into his kingdom and his coming in his kingdom. And I think that's absolutely correct. You see, in Psalms chapter 110, Christ would enter into his kingdom because he was going away into a far country there to receive the kingdom. He would receive the kingdom in the heavens, the heavenly place. He would come as the Son of Man to bestow that kingdom in full power and glory at his coming in judgment of the little horn. So you see, this is an important distinction to be made. And yet, far too few commentators acknowledge it. Anyway, the next passage I want to look at, I have to tell you quite simply, is one of those passages that early in my struggles, my eschatological struggles, it jumped off the page and it hit me up beside the head, kind of like a 4 by 10. Not a 2 by 4, maybe like an 8 by 12. Because you see, I was raised believing, I was raised teaching. I heard it proclaimed in debates. I heard it proclaimed in countless sermons. In Matthew 16, 27 and 28, I heard Jesus is talking about his coming at the end of the world, at the end of time. But in verse 28, Jesus is talking about Pentecost. Now, I have to be really honest. I was like an awful lot of people. I didn't think very critically when I was a real young guy. And so I would just like, oh, okay, that's cool. You know, whatever. The very first time I read Matthew 16, 27 and 28 as a united discourse, as a united, unbroken discussion, is when I got the 4 by 12 or 8 by 12 or whatever up beside the head. Now notice, for the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels and shall reward every man according to his works. Now at this juncture, as a young man, every preacher that I heard, every commentator that I read, in the period at the end of verse 27, they inserted a 2,000 year, so far, gap. And they had Jesus saying, okay, I just talked about the end of the world. And oh, by the way, let me jump backward in time from the end of the world to the day of Pentecost, which is maybe 6 months away. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. A real quick anecdote, and I've got to hurry here. This is going to delay my development of this text. But somewhere around 1983, I don't remember the precise year, but I believe it was 1983, Wayne Jackson, who was at the time considered the best debater in the Churches of Christ, even though strangely enough, in the 90s he refused more times than I can count to debate me on covenant eschatology. We had known each other for years. He knew my position. I challenged him more times than I can count to debate me formally, either in written form or in public. He absolutely refused. So, anyway, Wayne Jackson debated Robert Shank. Now, Robert Shank had been in the Calvinist Baptist world, and he left that world, but he was still a dispensationalist. Not all that many people understood that, but he came out with a book, Until He Comes. It's a big volume, and it's dispensational. And so Robert Shank debated Wayne Jackson at the Denton, Texas, Pearl Street Church of Christ lectures. And I have to tell you, Robert Shank, who, by the way, was a good friend of mine, I had known him for years as well. I had gotten to know him very well through a ministry that he had that my mother actually contributed to. So, Wayne Jackson gets up and accosts and condemns Robert Shank for his views of a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9. He said the dispensationalists have this really strange, unjustified ability to find huge gaps of time in Scripture where none is indicated. But in the written debate, in the written form of the debate which they had, commenting on Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Wayne Jackson said, we should not think it strange that in verse 27, Jesus spoke of the end of time, but in verse 28, he reverted to the day of Pentecost. This was a common practice in Jesus' teaching. Seriously? So you would condemn Robert Jackson and all dispensationalists for inserting a gap of 2,000 years between the 69th and the 70th week, but you would insert a 2,000-year gap between Matthew 16:27 and verse 28. Why? Well, because he claimed this was a relatively common practice. Well, if it was a relatively common practice, then why was Shank wrong to do what he did? This just illustrates the total inconsistency, and I might add the utter desperation of many people to avoid the power of Matthew 16:27 and verse 28. I want you to notice something. Point number one, the context of Jesus' promise, as N.T. Wright points out in his Jesus and the Victory of God, as Scott McKnight points out in his book, A New Vision for Israel, and as other biblical scholars have noted, the context of Jesus' promise in Matthew 16:27 and 28 is the fact that Jesus was sending his apostles, or going to send his apostles out to preach, and he knew, number one, he was going to be crucified. Number two, they were going to be persecuted. But that, and again, N.T. Wright, Scott McKnight, and others, verse 27 was Jesus' promise to come in vindication of their persecutors by judging their persecutors in AD 70. So you see, it's not just the full preterist who understands what's going on in Matthew 16:27. It's not just the full preterists who understand that Jesus in Matthew 16:27 was not talking about an end of the world event. He was not talking about the end of the Christian age. He was talking about his apostles as he sent them to preach into all of the world, Matthew 24:14. They were going to be persecuted, they were going to be killed, but that he promised them in Matthew 16:27, he was going to come in judgment of their persecutors, and that occurred in AD 70. And let me tell you, that is absolutely 100% accurate, and it is vindicated by the grammar of Matthew 16:27 and 28, which I will share with you on the flip side. See you there.